One thing that makes this channel interesting is that when I poll my audience, barely more than a quarter actually identify with me politically, while more than half identifies as being some sort of, flavor of left wing. The reason for this is obvious because I've talked to Destiny 4 times, CJ the X twice, FD Signifier twice, and JJ McCullough like 100 times. And a big chunk of my audience is just carryover from those fan bases who are decidedly not right wing, with the exception of JJ McCullough, who at least moonlights as an ultra-moderate conservative. The far more interesting question is, why do these people watch my videos at all? Well, it's very interesting for me to think about because you may wonder if I actually internalize, the feedback I get on my channel in the comments or emails or whatnot. And I do reflect on it in ways that you might not even be aware of. Much of the feedback I get is positive, ranging from people who say that I've helped them learn to humanize the side they disagree with, ranging all the way to people saying I am the chosen one or that I have changed their life.
Because your thoughts are like changing my whole life.
And much of the feedback I get is negative in creative ways, like that listening to me is the equivalent of intellectual waterboarding. You might wonder how I perceive this and how it affects what I do on YouTube. I have essentially two goals on YouTube. One is to communicate all the deeply, autistic, schizophrenic mental frameworks that make up the budding field of applied sociology, which is what I call my attempt to concretize the rules of mimetic and ideological warfare. This is just something I have to do as someone who is both cursed and blessed with a very high degree of openness. I need a creative outlet. If I don't have it, my relationships suffer. I smother all of the people in my life who are not obsessed with politics, and then, it just is overwhelming. The other goal of mine is to try and get everyone to stop hating each other more than they need to. I don't think it's a good idea or possible to eradicate hate entirely from the political discourse, but I do think it's realistic to get people who hate each other or think they hate each other to at least engage in the same space and potentially form temporary ideological coalitions that can help make progress on important solutions. Like, I think most far-right populists or far-left populists or classical liberals agree, hey, maybe ranked choice voting would be a good thing. And hey, maybe we should ban cell phones in schools with, moderate exceptions. And even if those are not the specific policies, just having a space where people can engage with the same set of facts, right? The same space. That's sort of how I view my channel in a lot of ways. So why does this appeal to people who don't identify with enlightened centrism, radical centrism? Well, one group of people is people who enjoy watching a dumpster fire, which according to many, I am a dumpster fire. And I can see why people think that. To be clear, there are also channels that I watch on YouTube solely for this purpose, because it's just so interesting to watch someone who is seemingly so unaware of their own flaws just move about the world and just continue to put stuff out there. And obviously I am unaware of some of my flaws. And, I'm sure people can observe that and find it interesting as I go out and continue to act like a fool. And so that would be one group of people. There's another group of people who are, I would say, largely ambivalent towards me in that they find it interesting if I continue to grow and, gain influence and communicate with people, but they wouldn't necessarily view it as a positive win for the discourse, let's say. They might really like one or two videos I've put out on a few topics and then just hate, everything else I say on a lot of other things. This is basically how I view someone like Destiny, Nick Fuentes, FD Signifier, Andrew Wilson. All of these people I get value out of listening to, at least just to as to understand, they're sort of barometers for where the discourse is moving and where certain personality types and ideological subgroups are aligning. But all of these people will say things that, like if I was going to a social event, like a party where I don't really know many people, and I brought a friend along and my friend said what these people say, I'd be thoroughly embarrassed, for some of the extreme stuff. But that doesn't change the fact that, there is something that is gained from listening to them. And I think that's how a good chunk of people view me. I think there's a lot of people, this is based on feedback I've gotten, who view me as sort of the barometer for what the average, mildly politically engaged person thinks and how they think, and are not super ideological, one side or another, which is interesting because on the one hand, I understand that, and I do view it as one of my core competencies to actually be able to properly sample the mimetic landscape and get a feeling for what the average person thinks, because I have relationships with people who are, up various levels of political engagement and very across different sides of the political spectrum to the degree that they fall on it at all. If you've watched my conversations with people, I just have the personality type where I'm able to get to the truth of what people think fairly quickly. If I won't just meet someone and immediately start talking about Israel, although I might, especially if they bring it up first. But, I'm good at getting a sense of what people think. And part of what drives me is communicating to people who are, in the terminally online space alongside me, that there is, a lot of different perspectives that should be taken into account, not just from an ideological point of view, but just from this is how people think. And if you want to be successful in whatever domain you're in, you need to adapt to that rather than claim, well, these people are wrong for thinking that way. It's like they might be, but that's how they think. So, deal with it. On the other hand, I do think I have some novel insight to add, especially in regards to the schizo-autist frameworks I put out, like the mimetic feudalism video and stuff like that. And I do think, a lot of people enjoy that as well. Now, one piece of feedback I hear from my audience is that Paul talks confidently on subjects that he does not do any research on and is not nearly as informed as he could be, which is the polite way of putting that. There's other ways that has been phrased. And obviously, this is true. I lean on the heuristic, say what you believe to be true as best as you can, and then see what happens. And I think what happens is that ends up becoming an excuse for, well, I don't need to be informed, because all I need to do is say what I really believe. And if I'm not informed, I'm not really violating that principle because I still believe it. But I go, there's back and forth on that because there's a variety of things. But like, if I'm going to make the case, if I'm going to get on YouTube to my largely left-wing audience and say, hey, there are valid reasons that someone might have voted for Donald Trump, well, then I should be ready to make that case, like pretty well. I should come armed with information and, B-roll clips that prove my point. And I don't even have like a single video explaining why, there was a crisis on the border. And that's why a lot of people voted for Donald Trump. Because there's people who will, talk to me or comment or come on my live streams and say, this is all bullshit. This is all just propaganda. So maybe I should show the clips of Richie Torres telling Sam Harris that, there was a crisis on the border.
And we saw catastrophic mismanagement of the migrant crisis.
How do you interpret that? I mean, that seemed to have been so obvious. I mean, that was just something that was politically, optically, the fact that anyone could just hold up a cell phone at the southern border and it looked like a zombie movie. How did the Biden administration not make that a priority immediately?
I really do believe I've failed to live up to the promise I made in literally the first video I ever posted, like as me, posting with me on camera, which was almost 5 years ago now, where I confidently asserted that no one would steel man the side that I disagree with better than me. I'm going to make the best argument I can for the side that I disagree with. And I think it'll be a better argument than any argument they can come up with. Because if they could come up with a better argument, I would be on that side. But I've never heard a better argument. Now, it obviously depends on what we're talking about. I mean, I'll be honest right now. I fucking hate Trump. And like people who say he's the best, I really struggle to understand. But I make my attempt to do so. If you love him, you're not going to hear any better pro-Trump arguments than from me. And if you hate him, you are going to hear very clearly why I hate Donald Trump as well. So something for everyone. You're welcome. Changing shirts. I just don't think I've done this. I don't think I've made the best possible case for Donald Trump or even against Donald Trump. But it's so less interesting to make the case against Donald Trump because everyone already agrees. Like if my audience, look, I do have conservatives who watch my videos. And if the majority of my audience was like pretty Christian, which is not that inconceivable, like I make a lot of Jordan Peterson videos, you could easily see a scenario where the majority of my audience was like very Christian, maybe Christian literalist, Christian fundamentalist. Then I would have an incentive to be like, okay, let me point out all the problems with Christian fundamentalism, like the science denialism, right? Denying evolution. I don't feel any need to be able to debate the theory of evolution. I feel like it's okay for me to assume that evolution is true and move forward. But there are people who will say, well, you can't even defend evolution. Why are you talking about it? I'm not going to believe it just because you assert it. It's like, that's fine. If I felt that there would be more value to my audience by giving that case, then I'd do that. But, really, my responsibility is not letting my ego get in the way of discerning the very, valid criticism of me from the shitty criticism just because there is shitty, unserious criticism mixed in with it. I do listen to and I do reflect upon good feedback, especially when it's honest feedback from people who, have recognized that I at least am not a liar and I'm not a crypto white nationalist according to the claims of some. Like people who take the time to go, yes, Paul, hey, I liked your video about X, Y, and Z, but I think you made a mistake here. I'm obviously much more inclined to listen to that compared to, someone saying that listening to me is like being waterboarded, which is genuinely funny. Okay. This is partly why I am so ironic all the time because the only appropriate response to unserious criticism is an equally unserious response, or just ignoring it outright, which is fine, or just raging at it, which you can do. But yes, obviously, while my personality is inherently, I do a lot of sarcasm and irony and make a lot of jokes and all that. Yes, I am also somewhat playing a bit of a character here, obviously, in that I'm gonna say things that are stupid and sound stupid, and I don't mind because it doesn't cost me anything. These are not people I know, and it's not that I don't care that they think I'm stupid. It's that it doesn't affect me, and if they actually pay attention to what I'm saying or doing long term, then they'll know I'm trying to pursue truth in my own flawed way, which is fine. I'm willing to pay the price for those flaws. So anyway, it's a unique experience. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to communicate to an audience that does not identify with me. It's the opposite of audience capture, which is a very real problem nowadays, and I'm glad I don't have that. It does prevent the creation or the facilitation of a community, quote unquote. Although I've said this before, I am likely going to reinstate my Patreon here at some point. And that would be a space where it's like, I don't know if it's not going to be a debate space, because there's just no way you can have far-right Christian nationalists and a bunch of Destiny fans and Israeli settlers and leftists, trans women in the same space and not have it go off the rails. So that's partly why it's such a interesting position I'm in. But I do want to facilitate some network effect, and so be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, it's interesting to think about these things out loud, and I'm curious to hear what feedback that people have for me. The kind of people who are willing to sit down and listen to my whole rant because they're interested. I'm more interested to hear people's perspectives than, people who are not seeing what I'm doing in any, even remotely complete sense. Anyway, until next time, good luck and Godspeed.